are you? At this time, I'd like to call to order the July 20th, 2023 regular board meeting of the North County Transit District. Before we begin, members of the public who may be viewing the meeting on the district's YouTube page, please note that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect to the meeting using the Zoom link provided on the agenda. In addition, you must also register by sending an email containing your name and phone number and the agenda item that you're interested in speaking about to clerk@nctd.org. I will now ask Suhel Rodriguez, our magnificent clerk of the board, to call roll.
Madam Chair. Board Member Weiss. Board Member Hensy. Here. Board Member Contreras.
Present.
Board Member White.
Present.
Board Member Desmond.
Here.
Board Member Drucker.
Here.
Board Chair Edson.
Present.
Board Member Jenkins. Vice Chair Patel. Here. That completes the roll.
Thank you very much. Vice Chair Patel, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Your right hand over your heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Suhel will now provide a safety brief and review evacuation procedures.
In case of an emergency, I will dial 911. In case of an evacuation, please take the stairs. Do not use the elevators. Once cleared of the building, do not re-enter unless cleared to do so by emergency personnel. There are fire extinguishers and first aid kits on each floor of the building. There's a portable defibrillator on the first floor and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures if needed. This concludes my safety brief.
Thank you very much. Suhel, do we have any public comments today?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time, public comments have closed. Before we proceed, I have a couple of quick protocol items to share. First, I ask board members to please hold your comments and questions until after each agenda item has been presented. Second, when the time comes for board member questions or comments, please raise your hand and wait to be called upon to speak. Third, when it's your turn to speak, please turn on and speak into your microphone. This is a new one. This will ensure that your comments are heard by those listening to the meeting in person and online, and I think it might help with the minutes a little too. Lastly, since the pesky voting system we normally use has given up the ghost, we are reverting back to the roll call votes until a new, hopefully not so pesky voting system is implemented. The first item on today's agenda is an update regarding the zero emission locomotive regulation imposed by the California Air Resources Board. Chris Orlando, Chief Planning and Communications Officer, and Mary Dover, our Government Affairs Officer, will explain how this new rule may impact NCTD. Chris and Mary, you have our attention.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Chair Edson. So today's presentation is just to provide the board with more information about the rulemaking that the California Air Resources Board did in April regarding in-use locomotives. First slide, please. So CARB approved the in-use locomotive regulation in April. It lays the framework for the statewide transition of zero emission rail operations. It covers both passenger rail and freight rail. NCTD was very involved in the development of the rule and working with CARB through the California Transportation Association to provide input. The rule would apply to NCTD's coaster fleet, but not the diesel multiple units of the Sprinter fleet. Next slide, please. So the rule lays out 3 compliance pathways to transition locomotive operations to zero emissions. A spending account, an alternative compliance plan, and an alternative fleet milestone option, affectionately called the AFMO. A little bit about how these pathways came to be. Originally, the rule included the first two pathways. And as I mentioned, working through CTA, the industry was able to negotiate with CARB to develop the third pathway there, which many in the industry, including NCTD, found to be a good option. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, who's going to walk through the details of each of compliance options.
Thank you, Chris. So as he mentioned, the spending account was kind of the core principle of the regulation. CARB's intent was for locomotive operators to divert some funds into a specified spending account that would be used to spend, the funds would be used for cleaner or zero emission locomotives. Cleaner just means cleaner locomotives than what you're operating now. For NCTD, we already operate, I think 75% of our locomotives are the cleanest technology available. So for NCTD purposes, that would mean on zero emission locomotives. Next, please. And then an alternative compliance plan for operators that would choose to not make deposits into the spending account would be called the alternative compliance plan. This one is still a little bit tricky because in order to get your ACP passed by CARB, you must demonstrate that the measures that you are taking will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in an amount similar to or greater than reductions that would have been observed if you were diverting funds into a spending account. That is up for negotiation with CARB through your alternative compliance plan. However, any alternative compliance plan that is approved by CARB, that operator must not operate Tier 4 locomotives after 2028. So NCTD's fleet is largely comprised of Tier 4 locomotives, so that poses some complications for NCTD. Next slide, please. And then the last compliance option, as Chris mentioned, the AFMO. Operators can submit an AFMO also to avoid making deposits into the spending account. And the operator must meet these 4 milestones. 50% of the fleet must be Tier 4 by the beginning of 2030. 100% must be Tier 4 by the beginning of 2035. 50% must be zero emission by 2042 and 100% by 2047. Next slide, please. Pass it back to Chris to talk about NCTD's preferred option.
So as we consider compliance of the new regulation, our preferred plan is the AFMA for several reasons. First and foremost, we've already are meeting the first 2 milestones of the regulation. So we are in a really good position to conform with the requirements of the AFMA that Mary just described. The spending accounts in the first option would have been incredibly challenging for the districts and would have diverted money from our ongoing capital program. So it would have constrained all other projects for this one. And as Mary noted, the alternative compliance plan wouldn't have matched well with our fleet implementation plan because we do have those Tier 4s already in path. So for our current rail planning, the preferred compliance plan is the AFMO, and that's what we would be developing. Next slide, please. As the board knows, in the April 20th meeting, the board approved our zero emission rail strategy. Thank you for doing that. That actually sets us up really well to comply with this new rule. You see there the tasks associated with this study, and this will be a primary vehicle for how we develop our transition plan and how we comply with the rule. This work is getting started now. We've already kicked off this project. And so this, along with having transitioned the fleet already on the first 2 milestones, puts us in a really good position to comply with the timelines within the rulemaking. Next slide, please. Here you see the timeline for the implementation of the regulation. It was adopted on the 27th of April. The final regulation package was issued in June. The package is not final yet until it goes through administrative law review and approval, which is set to occur next week. And once that is in place, the rule will be in place. This presentation is a precursor to us bringing our compliance plan back to the board this fall. And so we will be back before you with our AFMO for your review and approval. Once the board approves it, we would then seek approval from CARB, which has to be completed by April, and then the regulation goes into effect on a year from this month on July 1st, 2024. Next slide, please. There was a recent development, however. The freight operators on June 16th, the associations that support freight operations in the state have filed a suit against CARB about the regulation. You can see there what they argue in their regulation. We don't know yet what impact this will have, but we are watching this lawsuit as we go through. Our intention is to continue our path towards compliance while this works its way through, because we don't know what will come of this, but it could impact the timeline that I just showed. Next slide, please. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you both for that informative presentation. This was an information only item, so a vote will not be required today. Suhail, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, we do not.
Thank you. At this time, public registration to speak on this item will end. Board members. Okay, I'm Board Member Drucker, then Board Member Contreras.
Thank you very much for the presentation. On slide 6, it says Tier 4 locomotives cannot be operated in California after January 1st, 2030.
Yeah, if you chose that compliance path, then yes, but with the AFMO, you're able to get approval to operate after that point. So that's
Okay.
one of the other reasons we'll be pursuing the AFMO, because it'll give us the ability to continue operating those Tier 4s.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Contreras.
I just want to thank you for being so involved in the process. I'm sure that you all were very involved in having the alternative fleet milestone option. I think that preserves a lot of what we're doing at NCTD to eventually come into compliance, understanding that there are a lot of capital constraints and whatnot. I know we've had several discussions about, the Sprinter and the Coaster, and potentially having the Sprinter not be so unique compared to the Coaster. Is there ever a possibility that there would be swappable locomotives between the two?
Yeah, and that is the part of the DB study that was referenced earlier. We'll look at interoperability as you're referencing, and the notion being that, yeah, we could operate the Sprinter vehicle on the main line. Again, it would have to be a different unit. So part of the DB effort will be to look at is that a better path for us in terms of compliance?
Okay, yeah, just curious, because obviously if it is going to be very similar to what we're going to use on the Coaster, then it would need to comply with some of these additional regulations. So thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you. Any other board members? Seeing no hands raised, I have a couple of questions. Why are the Sprinter diesel multiple units exempt?
Because it's not considered, it's a hybrid rail, so it's not considered heavy rail, and that's what the regulation covers. So.
Okay, thank you for that. I was curious. And my next question was already answered, and just wanted to mention that I support continuing with the path outlined in the timeline to continue to be in compliance. And thank you for that presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, may we have motion for minutes? May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of June 15th, 2023?
Contreras will move that motion.
I'll second that motion. It's Lindsay.
Motion by Contreras, second by Hensy. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Vice Chair Bob Patel,
Aye.
Board Member Drucker,
Yes,
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member White,
aye.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yeah.
Board Member Jenkins, Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Contreras, seconded by Board Member Hensy, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting of June 15, 2023. Motion passes. Jenkins absent.
Thank you. There are 9 items on our consent agenda today. Suhail, have any members of the public requested that any consent items be pulled?
No, Madam Chair.
At this time, registration to speak on consent has ended. Board members, do you wish to pull any items from consent? Board Member Weiss.
6.
Item 6 will be trailed to the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve consent items 2 through 5 and 7 through 11?
Contreras will move approval.
Second by Bat Patel.
Motion by Contreras, second by Bhat Patel. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Vice Chair Bat Patel,
Aye.
Board Member Drucker,
Yes.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member White,
You say white or wise?
White,
Aye.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond.
Yeah.
Board Member Jenkins. Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Contreras, seconded by Vice Chair Bat Patel to approve consent items 2 through 5 and 7 through 11. Motion passes, Jenkins absent.
Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have 2 other business items. The first is an overview of the legislative program, including a federal legislative update and status of tracked state legislation. Staff will also provide a summary of transit funding in the recently passed FY 2023-2024 state budget, including funding for infrastructure and zero emission transit vehicles, and formula funding from the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program for transit capital projects. Chris and Mary never left. They're still here. And they're going to once again be presenting. So thank you. You have the floor.
Great, thank you. Sorry, it's us again. So we wanted to bring this item before you. There's been a lot that's happened at the federal and state level that impacts NCTD. So we'll just give you a brief overview of federal and state legislative matters. Next slide, please. So just a general overview of the legislative program at NCTD. As you know, in your board packet every month, you receive an intergovernmental affairs report and a tracked legislation report. These provide an overview of legislative matters impacting NCTD and also bills that specific bills in the state legislature that impact NCTD. We also track additional legislation internally that may have an indirect impact on NCTD or impact some of our partners. We also participate in legislative efforts with the American Public Transportation Association and the California Transit Association. Next slide, please. An exciting federal legislative update. As some of you know, NCTD was recently awarded $29.3 million to fund 23 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. And coupled with that is a workforce training program. A key component of the grant was workforce training in an effort to ensure that all of NCTD and transit workers throughout the country are equipped to ensure a successful transition to zero emission operations. Next slide, please. The U.S. Department of Transportation also last month released the multimodal project discretionary grant opportunity. And this pairs 3 grant programs together: the mega grant program, infra program, and rural program. They have similar guidelines, so they were packaged together. Last cycle, NCTD applied for funding for the San Diego Double Track Phase 2 project. Although unfortunately we were not selected, we were one of the very few projects to receive a highly recommended designation from DOT. So in that vein, we've decided to seek funding for that project as well. We recently received $100 million from the state of California for this project. So this request will fully fund the project if awarded. Next slide, please. A few pieces of state legislation that I wanted to highlight for the board. AB 610. It was reintroduced by Assemblymember Holden. It passed the legislature last year, but was vetoed by Governor Newsom. It would provide free youth transit passes for entities throughout California. The Governor Newsom vetoed the legislation because it didn't have, although he supported the goal of youth transit passes, it didn't have a tied funding source. That issue has not necessarily been mitigated this time around, so we will see. It has been passed out of the Assembly and is in the Senate. NCTD has not taken a position on this bill, but we're monitoring. AB 719 was introduced by Assemblymember Berner. It will reimburse transit operators for what we call non-emergency medical transportation, and these are trips on our Lyft paratransit service. Right now, NCTD provides the service and is not currently reimbursed. So this bill would provide us with a decent amount of funding for our Lyft paratransit service. This was passed out of the Assembly and is currently in the Senate pending before the Appropriations Committee. We did support this legislation, and it was also co-sponsored by the California Transit Association and the Metropolitan Transit System. And finally, SB 677 was sponsored by Senator Blake Spear, and it will require that the Losan Rail Corridor Agency prioritize climate resiliency in projects along the Losan Corridor. It was passed out of the Senate and is now pending before the Assembly Appropriations Committee. And similarly, we have not taken a position on this bill, but are monitoring its impacts. Next slide, please. Most importantly, probably, is the state of California passed their budget on June 30th, signed into law on June 30th. And it includes $5.1 billion over a few fiscal years for public transit. Included in that is $1.1 billion for zero emission transit vehicle and infrastructure funding over the next couple fiscal years. The entire budget package, the legislature passes one budget and then it's accompanied by several other bills. And it includes 28 bills. So although we have information on a lot of what's in the budget, there are still budget bills that will be passed that'll provide us additional implementing language and some clarification. So I'll pass it off to Chris to talk about some of the important pieces in the state budget.
Yeah, next slide, please. So we wanted to provide the board with a little more detail on the transit funding within the budget. We know that's gotten a lot of attention, so I wanted just to give the board a little bit more details about the two main components of the transit funding. So the first piece is the zero emission transit capital program. This is the 1.1 billion over the next 4 fiscal years to assist agencies in transitioning to zero emissions. This funding allows for flexibility for both capital and operations related to zero emissions operations. There are 2 components of the distribution, 50-50 split on the components based on population, and then the other half on revenue distribution. They have not published the exact formula allocations yet, but based on some prior allocations, we believe this will be approximately 6.2 million for NCTD in the next 2 years. Next slide, please. The larger piece of the funding was the TIRCP funding allocation. So this is 4 billion over the next 2 fiscal years, 2 billion each year. And it supports transit capital projects from the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program, or TIRCP. Again, the funding allows for flexibility for the funding to be used for operations and capital. The funding will be distributed through a population-based formula. And based on the formula, we anticipate that NCTD would be eligible to receive about $48 million. A point of clarification on this, the way the legislation is written, and this is true of other allocations to us, the funding actually is allocated to SANDAG, and then that funding is passed through to us. That happens on other similar grant applications. So the receiving entity would be SANDAG in this under this funding, but then as a pass through to NCTD as the operator. Next slide, please. So as with all funding, it comes with strings. As the legislature and the governor worked on the added transit funding, accountability was a buzzword they used as they talked about this additional funding. And so the legislation for both components includes what the legislature and the governor called accountability measures. And these are what you see in the 2 columns. So the column on the left is if you are using the funds for capital or operations, you have to comply with the list that you see there, and you have to submit these reporting requirements to the state in order to receive the money, whether or not you're using it for capital or operations. The good news is many of these things and most of these things we already do, and so it's a matter of us just building the plan and applying. If you choose to use any component of the funding for operations, there is an added level of accountability. The items you see there on the right. And so it actually requires you develop a plan for how the funding will be used, and then an additional layer of reporting that agencies who use the funding for operations must comply with. Next slide, please. So here are some potential uses of the funding for capital projects. Just a note, as we go through this list, the final guidelines of this funding are not published yet. So these uses are subject to what the guidelines actually say. We expect those, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, but expect those to be out this month, so soon. And that'll help us clarify how we'll use the money, but these are the potential uses we've identified. So the board's familiar with the Breeze Speed and Reliability Study. So there are potential infrastructure projects within that study that the funding could be used for. We are always seeking funding for our State of Good Affairs capital program. Funding is eligible for that. The school Sprinter corridor infrastructure improvements. As the board knows, we are seeking to improve the infrastructure along the Sprinter corridor to improve frequency. And so this funding would be eligible for that. Station improvements and customer enhancements. This was one of the key themes out of the funding, was to fund customer experience enhancements. So we potentially could use it for that. And then the zero emission transition pieces, which are part of the 1.1 billion. So both improvements in fleet transitions, and then as well as our rail transition that we just talked about in the previous presentation, and then also business process and efficiency improvements. So those are all areas we've identified as potential uses for this funding. As I noted, when the final guidelines are published, we'll know more about the particulars of the funding requirements, and we'll develop a plan for exactly how we'll use the money at that point. Next slide, please. So the next steps, again, the guidelines will be published this month for comment. So industry has an opportunity to comment on the guidelines when they're published. And then by September 28th, they will be final. And that's when we will begin the development of the reporting requirements and the plan. And then we would identify eligible uses and develop the operator plan and move forward. Next slide.
And there is an action before you today. It's just to receive the monthly intergovernmental affairs report that is included in your board packet and that we presented to you today. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Suhel, do we have any public comments on this item today?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time, public registration to speak on this item has ended. Board members, do you have any questions? Okay, I'll start at this end with Board Member Hensy.
Thank you. I always enjoy these presentations. I had a question regarding the San Diego Bridge double tracking project and the assessment we received that it's a highly recommended designation. Does that help us in future grant applications for that project?
I would like to say yes at some point. So essentially what that means is that our project has merit in the eyes of DOT. Sometimes there are extenuating circumstances for grant awards. So yes, it does. It shows that as the application that we submitted last time, they believe that our application has merit. So then it's my job to make the case outside of the application.
And then an important point on that is when these grant processes are complete, we always do a post brief with the granting agency where we go through the application and they explain to us where we rated high and where we rated low. And so the fact that we were highly recommended, and then they pointed out, and we don't call exactly where they were on this one. They point out where we could have done better or where we needed to do more work. And so that lets us, bring it even to the next level for the next round. So, so we did that with this. And so, we're feeling we started in a really good place and we'll be even better positioned this time around as well.
That's great. Great job. Another question is on the AB 610, the free youth transit passes. We're not taking a position, which I assume is because we don't want to incur more costs than we can handle. But is there a way for us to be able to support it with a caveat that we support without increased costs for us?
Yeah, so we're, as we've mentioned, we're a member of the California Transit Association. And so on a lot of legislative matters, we provide input to the association, and then the association advocates on transit agencies' behalf. So one of the things they have taken a support with amendments position, I think is the exact designation. And so they're working with the author and the governor's office on potential fixes to ensure that there is a funding stream attached to it.
I believe that Board Member Contreras. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. And I had a similar question to Board Member Hensy regarding AB 610. So hopefully there's an opportunity where we can say that we, approve and support this. Looking at AB 719, do we have any kind of approximation of how much more money would be projected that we would be receiving for reimbursement?
Yes and no. I can tell you how much. So right now, on average, it costs, I believe, $113 for one of these trips. Our one-way lift ticket cost is $5. So there's a gap of about
Yeah.
$108.
Pretty big.
I don't know that it will be that amount that we will be reimbursed, but we will at least get some of that. We'll be able to recoup some of that.
Okay, and do we have an idea of how we intend to utilize any of the funding that goes? Is it just to recover cost, or is it to make the lift system better?
It's literally just to recover costs. Right now, there's a schedule that the agencies make available for the private sector transportation providers. And it's essentially taking that same schedule, porting it over to public transit agencies. And literally all this does is help write down the costs associated with us providing the service.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious if it would potentially have the ability to be used to close some of those donuts that we talked about, the donut holes that we talked about in the future, although I understand that that could increase the delta even more. But just wanted to throw it out there.
Yeah, no, I think, I know we've done some additional steps in terms of donut hole closing. So the number of donuts are less. I think part of these gaps need to be discussed, not in the context of ADA paratransit, but in the context of microtransit opportunities that we can make available to communities outside of our core service area. And that's what my goal would be, is to look at where we're not necessarily bringing everyone into the LIFT program, because the ADA paratransit program, as specified by law, is a super duper regulated process. Not every trip is, and I'm saying from the user riding experience would be the best trip, having to be scheduled and operated through that framework. Our goal is more about transportation mobility and flexibility and toolbox, so that we can potentially meet the transportation or mobility need, but do it in a way that's most context sensitive to the customer and most cost effective to NCTD and the taxpayer.
Okay, I look forward to that discussion coming forward to the board at some point. I would just say that, we consistently see a lot of issues with our lift system. So any additional money that could be leveraged, not only to close that delta, but to maybe enhance the system, has been mentioned in previous meetings, I think would be an honorable goal of NCTD.
Yeah, and candidly, I wish money was the issue. It's a little bit more complex than that. The performance issues are human being issues that we need to address in terms of actual performance. So it's not the case that it's an underfunded program. We just need to do a better job. Our contractor needs to do a better job of executing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a different ways to go about it, and even being able to have a comprehensive plan. I know every plan costs money, but I know we're working on it. I'm not trying to put you in the hot seat. I know we're working on making it better, but I just had a question about that, because it could potentially, what I saw in the city of Vista is when legislation changed and we got reimbursement on the fire side on our ambulance for certain trips to the hospital. It has really allowed us to expand our program to have more EMTs. So just, curious about how much money we would get and how we're going to spend it. But I'm sure that will come to the board in the future.
It will. And remember, it's a very nuanced, because it's not everyone who rides lift service, not every one of those trips fall into this category. So it will be something that's actually going to only be known once the legislation is implemented and once you go through a period of time. And I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to define it in two different ways when we're talking about lift. You're talking about program enhancements, which is kind of different from service quality and service delivery. And those are two different things. So service enhancements and program expansion, yes, that costs money. But in terms of what we've been talking about primarily around lift is service performance, it's scheduling, it's the scheduling software, is the way that it's specifically been executed from a customer service. Throwing money won't fix that. That's going to be a much more rigorous process of retraining and ensuring that people understand what they're supposed to do and that they're executing in the appropriate way. But I get your distinction between what you're talking about. You're looking at potential investments and program enhancements as opposed
Yeah, just
to,
super curious about it, but that's a great way of outlining what I'm saying. And so do we have a estimate? I know it's not in here in this presentation of how much in a year it's cost us to do these types of rides that cost $113.
well, we have a budget. Yeah, we have a program budget for ADA paratransit. We can give you the actual number for the most recent fiscal year.
Yeah, that would be great. I would appreciate that.
But again, it's what you're trying to get to. You're not going to be able to get to until and if this legislation gets implemented. We have to put all the protocols. What I will do is I'll work with staff because previously there was a reimbursement program. And I'll look to see if we could find a historical context of a percentage breakdown between the total spend or the amount of revenue that we got.
Yeah, that would be, it's more information. So I'm just curious, but I think this is really exciting. And it could really help us out. Yeah, just curious why we're not taking a position on 677 as well, but it could be another issue with costs, not sure.
Well, so generally speaking, I would assume is once you guys get more detailed information in terms of what the funding source is, you would jump in and we'd send a letter. The board has provided a pretty solid framework for authorizing us to advance a legislative program consistent within the parameters. A lot of times this gets down to knowing more detail about what's in the bill before you send that letter of support. But we're very cognizant. We're tracking those. I think some of the items we already sent letters of support once the details were known, like, for example, the budget bill that provided that additional relief and the zero emission program. Once you know the details of the program, that's the appropriate time. I don't think it supports the legislation to say, I'm going to send you a letter with all of these caveats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what you're saying is just, it's too early in the process for these.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. My last question is on the TIRCP. Can this be used on the Sprinter corridor?
Yes, TRCP can be used on the Sprinter corridor.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, any other board member questions? Seeing none, I have a question on the TIRCP presentation. It mentions that there is funding for capital and operations, and that for operations there are special criteria or special compliance items. Or do we intend to go that direction, or?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am, we do not intend to use the operating money. This represents an awesome opportunity for the district. Just for clarity, is that $48 million an annual number or 2 years?
As we were reading it, it wasn't clear. Yeah, so the 6.2 million for the zero emission and the 48 million is this fiscal year. Although there is funding for future years included in this budget, it actually has to be appropriated each year. So we tried to stick to just what we are eligible for this year, and they're rough approximates, as I
So
mentioned.
I'm going to ask Mary a question to see if she answers the question correctly.
Oh, dear.
So
No, you're in the hot seat.
So Mary, based upon our conversation about the 48 million,
Mhm.
how much money am I expecting you to generate?
Oh, gosh. I think what he's getting at is, since this is state funding, it can be used to leverage federal funding. As you all know, federal grant programs require a significant local match. So I'm bad at math and
Yeah, so what I've said to Mayor, so, and this is in all seriousness, I give her like $1.5 billion number. But this literally should appropriately done leverage at least $200 million of other dollars. And so the intent for us is that this represents significant opportunities for us to really move our program forward in a significant way. So we don't intend to use the money for operating, and that's why when we identified on that slide, it's all capital activities that we intend to do.
Great, thank you. And with regard to AB 610, as a couple of my colleagues have mentioned, I would be very much in support of sending a letter once there's, or a letter that actually recommends, once funding is identified, that we are very supportive of this item. Okay, we managed to actually not call a speaker on this item, so we're going to take a step backward for just a second and call Joan Brown.
Ms. Brown, you have 3 minutes.
Yes. Well, I'm a ADA pass recipient, and I'm thankful for this. I used to take a lot of Lyft, paratransit, but I can still walk well, so I choose to take public transportation. And I listen to all these state funds and federal funds, billions and millions. And all I would like to see is thousands. Because what I find, I cannot read street signs. I can't see where a bus stop is. And I only know all this stuff because I've been very active and I've been proactive with public transportation. And at the age of 90, I should stop and just take Uber. And well, in fact, Scan, my Advantage plan in Medicare, is now using Lyft, at least. I mean, not Lyft, L-I-F-T. I'm talking about L-Y-F-T, like Uber. And it's so much simpler now because I could spend hours talking about Lyft paratransit here because I took that for a while. But I now live in San Marcos. I've lived in Oceanside for 25 years. And Oceanside badly needs them. San Marcos is very, very good at it. And I'm talking about talking lights at crosswalks. I call them talking lights because I like to be told, wait, 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 and then to cross when it should. And there are a lot of four-way stops like at, I'm talking about Avenida del Oro and Oceanside Boulevard. I mean, I've been called many names because I can't see the lights and the people just don't go across Oceanside to go into that parking lot. So I never know when to cross because I have to listen to traffic. So my suggestion is that the cities buy a gross amount of those buttons, white and yellow, that people could push. I mean, they really need one on Horn right here and Mission, and they put one down by Main Street, one-way traffic. This one, the only way I know how to cross this one is because people do use that. I mean, people walk at that center. But most of these, people never walk. You know,
30
they
seconds.
just drive into all of them. And then the buses, some of the buses like 353 in San Marcos and the 318, they don't stop at what do you call them, shopping centers. They go from point A to point B, and they're in the middle of a lane in front of 20 stores and restaurants. So you need more stops. I have no idea how much the talking light mechanism costs, but I'm sure it can't be any more than $10,000, if that. Because I remember many years ago, they were talking about the the blue, thing where you sit and wait for the bus was $10,000, and I didn't think that was worth any $10,000, but these talking lights for old people, young people, school kids, because I see them running across the street, would be very beneficial to spend all those millions of dollars on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Brown. It's kind of important to know that we don't actually do those talking lights, but perhaps talking to your local cities and Caltrans might be more beneficial. We're really thrilled you were here today, though, and participated. And at 90, I'm very impressed that you're out here. My dad's 91, and I know it takes some effort at your age. So thank you for joining us. I just wanted to mention that there's something that's coming up which on our agenda, which is a discussion over wayfinding. So that may make things a little easier for you to read signage in certain locations with regard to public transportation. And also I encourage you to look up FACT, F-A-C-T, because it's another source of rides that's door to door. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve item 12?
So moved. I'll second.
Motion by Bhat Patel, second by Hensy. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Vice Chair Bhat Patel,
Aye.
Board Member Drucker,
Yes.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member White,
Yes.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins, Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Vice Chair Bhat Patel, seconded by Board Member Hensy, to receive the monthly intergovernmental affairs report, motion passes. Board Member Jenkins absent.
Thank you. The final item on today's agenda is a presentation regarding electronic sign installation at coaster and sprinter stations. This project implementation will support NCTD's final wayfinding master plan, which establishes universal design standards for signage at our stations. Our Deputy Chief Development Officer, Scott Loschke, is here to present this item. Welcome, Scott. And I promise I'll practice your last name. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Chair Edson, and good afternoon, Board. This presentation, as the Chair said, is to provide information on the next phase of our wayfinding master plan, which is the station platform electronic stop signs installation, but also an opportunity to give you an update and overview of the overall wayfinding master plan that we have in process. Next slide, please. And so as background, in 2019, we completed a wayfinding master plan that laid out signage, various signage types, designs, and locations. And then based on that, we developed essentially a phasing plan to fund and execute that wayfinding master plan. With the first couple of phases being bus stop signs, new bus stop signs, and then the next is the ongoing station platform electronic signs. And again, the specific requested action today is to approve the award of the agreement for the installation of the platform electronic signs. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the bus stop signs that were installed throughout the district at about 1,600 plus bus stops. The picture on your left is an example of the bus stop sign and the various blades for the routes that each sign or each stop supports. In the middle is a special additional blade that was developed for school routes that has also been completed. And then on the right is a sign that is generally going to be installed on bus stop poles, but where there's no pole, whereas some signs are fixed to shelters or light poles, et cetera. But these will be put at every bus stop that, number one, allows riders to know for sure that they're right bus stop number, but also gives them an opportunity to either text or use the QR code to link in to get information on next bus arrival. So they can get real-time information on buses coming in. And so if a bus is late, or if they just need to know what the next arrival is, they can text that, get that information back, or like I said, access that via a QR code into the program for that. And then next slide, please. Then the next phase is now the electronic platform signs. And so in last year in October, the board approved the agreement with Alpha Programmable Signs to purchase the signs. And then we're now coming to the board today to award the agreement to install those signs. The sign purchase agreement was awarded, and we've received 3 of the 4 shipments of those signs, with the last shipment scheduled to arrive next month. And so we're now ready to proceed with the award of the installation of those signs. And those signs, as was discussed when this was brought to the board last October, will integrate with the CalPID's real-time information system across different agencies, including Amtrak and Metrolink. Next slide, please. Right, this slide, the next slide will give a little bit more pictorially what is going to change and what these signs will look like. The sign there on your left is an example of some of the signs out there today. Typically on the Sprinter platforms, we have signage that have very limited capability to provide information. They're usually a one-liner and very limited, again, visibility-wise. The picture on the right is shows how the new signs will be mounted, typically on the underside of shelters. And so you can see it on the platform. Most of the signs are two-sided. So whether you're on the either side of that signage, you'll be able to see it. Next slide will show a little bit more detail of what the signs can show. And so top left picture indicates what the sign looks like, kind of a profile view and a shield. If the sign isn't under a canopy, we have those shields that are installed on those signs to provide some reduced glare. But you can see the other pictures that show the types of information that can be provided, various lines of information or larger and in color. And so you can provide a lot of different information as needed on those signs. Typically, our signs will show the next trains coming, but as needed, if we need to convey different information, emergency, et cetera, they can show that information as well. And there are speakers also attached that can provide coordinated voice message along with the visual signage. Next slide, please. Small print here, but this is a matrix of all of the various signage that's going to get installed as part of this. We purchased a total of 65 signs throughout all stations. And the contract upon award and upon notice to proceed will take 200 days to complete, or that's the scheduled completion pending any unforeseen conditions that come up, which we don't expect because it's pretty straightforward installation for these signs. Next slide, please. Stepping forward past the current phase of the electronic platform signs, the next phases will be to install the rest of the wayfinding signage, which include vertical electronic signs on the left, and those have essentially monitors built into them that have data feed as well and can show, for example, at OTC, all the different traffic that's coming in throughout the day, sort of like at an airport with all the different flights. So it'll show much more information than the station platform electronic signs and, identify the platform, et cetera. So there'll be very useful signs to give a bigger picture, especially at our busy stations that have a variety of different services. The signs on the right indicate some of the types of static signs that will go in, from taller signs that sort of show the direction and show where to go to those long horizontal signs that are typical to a platform that'll show kind of what station you're at, where it is within that line and the next stops, et cetera. And finally, on the right is a picture of the new monument sign that was installed at Solana Beach. That one was put in place early because there was damage to that sign, and so we had to either just take it down or put something in, and it really gave us an opportunity sort of to test case our design, to use the design standard and materials. And so we put that in last year. And so we've got a few lessons learned from that one, but it came out, I think, very nicely. And you can see from the photo, it fits the bill there to provide signage as you're coming into the station on the corner of the street there. Next slide, please. Future phases, as I mentioned, is going to be those electronic and static signage. And this slide shows the funding requested for those future phases. That first group, the first 5 locations are intended to be done with FY24 CIP funding, which was approved this year in June. And so that project is completing the planning stages and will be submitted going forward to execute that here shortly. The next 2 phases are currently planned in the next couple of fiscal years, FY25 and FY26. Again, we get additional funding, we can certainly speed those up. If we have funding shortfalls, we can adjust as needed. But those are the current requested and planned dates for those. And we'll complete essentially those, each of the stations now and complete a full build out because the signage kind of goes together and it doesn't make sense to parse them out any further by signage type. It's better to do them each location and, like I said, build out the entire signage each location from here. Next slide, please. So for the agreement in front of us today, it was posted on Planet Bids on May 5th. And we received 3 bids with the lowest responsive and responsible bid coming from Roma Engineering and Construction for $669,000. Slide, please. The project schedule, this just gives a really high milestone schedule of the overall project. Again, we awarded the purchase of the sign separately. That delivery of those signs are in progress. And then upon award of the current agreement, we project completion of the installation of the signs in February of 2024. Next slide, please. And so based on that information, staff recommendation is that the board approves award of agreement 23069 to Roma Engineering and Construction Incorporated for the installation of horizontal electronic signage at all NCTD Sprinter and Coaster station platforms in an amount not to exceed $669,103. And with that, I will pause and take any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I was actually on a wayfinding subcommittee quite a long time ago, and it's really nice to see it all happening and look forward to it. Madam Clerk, have there been any members of the public who submitted a speaker slip on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, at this time, registration to speak on this item will end. Board members, do you have any questions? Board Member Contreras.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This is incredible. Wayfinding can be very, very difficult. And this is a step in the right direction to help people move through our system better. You know, I made the mistake. I think maybe it was a mistake to wear my coaster shirt last time I came to the board meeting. I had a lot of questions. A lot of folks came up to me for questions about where they could go, where's the actual platform to get, you know, the coaster. They're like, you sure it's not this? I'm like, this is not going to take, this Sprinter is not going to take you to San Diego. I'm sorry. But I do have a question regarding wayfinding for folks that are visually impaired. We had a really great public comment earlier. And so is there an audio component to the visual component that we're talking about?
Yes, there are speakers with the signage. Unfortunately, I don't know the exact details of what messages are currently planned, but there are speakers, the capability's there.
Okay, yeah, I would love to hear you know, some more feedback in the future about what kind of audio messaging we actually plan to do with the capability that the speakers have. Thank you. Outside of that, I just look forward to hearing some more information about the audio component.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So Solana Beach, my station says it has 2 double-faced, 2-sided LED display signs. I'm assuming these are on the opposing platforms?
Any of the existing signage will go away.
Okay.
So this will replace all of the existing electronic signage.
And so these signs will be on at the platform level because we're
Yes.
grade separated in
Yes,
Solana
it will
Beach.
be at the platform, typically under canopies.
Okay.
where their canopies are, but yes.
Okay, and is there any, I didn't see any LED signs planned for the station level? So before people decide to go downstairs?
So those would, if there are any, and I believe we will likely have them at Solana Beach. I don't have the exact count in front of me, but those would be those vertical electronic signs with the monitor in them. That would be what you would see typically at the station level or at the, the station entrance.
Great, thank you. That's a good answer. And will the signage show, the platform level signage show both Pacific Surfliner and Coaster
Yes.
times?
Yes.
That's really
That's
great.
one of the key features of the CalPIT system is it ties into the rest of the systems to gather that information and feed it in.
Terrific. Thank you so much. May I have a motion to approve agenda item 13?
So, second.
Motion by Desmond, second by Bob Patel. Please call the vote.
Vice Chair Bob Patel,
Aye.
Board Member Drucker,
Yes.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member White,
Yes.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond,
Yes.
Board Member Jenkins, Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Desmond, seconded by Vice Chair Bob Patel, to award agreement 23069 to Roma Engineering Construction Incorporated for station platform electronic sign installation. Motion passes. Board Member Jenkins absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. It's time for the Executive Director's Report. Matt, do you have anything for us?
Madam Chair, we
Oh,
have.
wait,
item
I
number
forgot.
6.
Sorry, Peter. We had item 6 from closed session was pulled by Board Member Weiss.
So in looking at the staff report, this contract is specifically for rail planning, scheduling. So rail corridor planning, scheduling, project planning and development. And it looks like it's going to be costing an average of about $3.5 million a year for that. Is there not a way to hire someone to do this cheaper? And do you think this is a good use of taxpayer money?
Great question. Katie Person, she's the project manager on this contract. What you're approving is authorization to spend, not a commitment to spend. So we issue task orders on a case by case basis or project by project basis. And so Katie and I, when I stepped out, we were talking about this. This is the second time we've procured this type of service. First time we procured it is the contract that resulted from the collaboration between NCTD and BNSF on the freight pathing study that we received 200 and something million, which then sent us into a spiral of having to do to advance all of these projects. And we ended up spending and exceeding our contract value and needing to re-procure. And so one of the lessons learned is that we needed to establish sufficient capacity in the contract, because in the world that we live in, I mean, there's some base things that we're going to have to do year by year, like rail scheduling is a task that's an ongoing task that they're going to have to do for us on a basis, on a project by project basis. You get into a project like the Sprinter with this $48 million and you start down that path. And the next thing you know, you get another grant and then you're moving a capital or planning development project forward. There are task orders that are tied to other project activities. And I'll give you just an example because I want the board to understand this is an on-call contract. It's not a commitment to spend, it's an authorization to spend. And so, for example, we have a wheel truing machine that we need to have installed at Coaster. So there's likely to be a planning task issued to them before we go to an engineering phase to make sure we understand from a business perspective. Train wash, if you hear me, if you know how much I talked about train wash, you would never want to hear me talk about train washes again. But we have to do a similar business case analysis around train wash. So it's not a commitment, and anything that exceeds my authority of $500,000 will come back to the board as a specific task order for the board to approve.
Thank you. I'll move approval.
Second.
Okay, second by Bob Patel, motion by Director Weiss. Please call the vote.
Vice Chair Bob Patel,
Aye.
Board Member Drucker,
Yes.
Board Member Hensy,
Yes.
Board Member White,
Yes.
Board Member Weiss,
Yes.
Board Member Desmond, Board Member Jenkins, Board Chair Edson,
Yes.
Board Member Contreras.
Aye.
On the motion of Board Member Weiss, seconded by Vice Chair Bat Patel, to award agreement number 24004 to DBECO for on-call rail planning, scheduling, and other services, and authorize the execution of task order number 1 for quality management and performance improvement support services. Motion passes. Board Member Jenkins absent.
Thank you. Sorry for jumping the gun. It is now your turn to talk, man.
No report.
After all that. Suhel, do we have any remaining public comments?
No, Madam Chair.
Terrific. Well, thanks, everyone. As a reminder, since we're dark in August, our next regularly scheduled board meeting will be Thursday, September 21st, 2023 at 2 p.m. It's hard to think that we'll be about 3/4 through the entire year by then. I hope everyone has a really lovely summer break, and this meeting's adjourned.